This presentation tonight officially kicks off budget season. So Enrique is here with a lot of different details and analysis of district finances, as well as assumptions around state aid and expenses and revenues. So this is our 30,000-foot overview. Where we go from here in subsequent meetings is we analyze budget recommendations by department. So at some point, I don't have the calendar in front of me, but Lisa will present the PPS budget, Tom Baker will talk athletics, transportation, facilities, instruction, yada, yada, yada. So tonight is the official kickoff, and I'll turn it over to Enrique.
Hi everyone, good evening. First of all, let me tell you that I've been doing this in this district for 11 years. And since my first year, I put pictures of students, and I can tell you that they get better and better. And you can see it here, like that you don't fall asleep in my presentation. You can actually try to, you try to stay awake to see the next picture. So that's my strategy. Anyway, we can start with that strategy. Beautiful picture. Okay. You see? So we're going to start with historical data. First of all, I want to show you how we budget against expenses. As you can see, we run a very tight ship. The budget really is very close to the actual expenses, even though we start the budget a year and a half before we actually finish our expenses. So here we don't have a lot of extra money to spend, so we try to spend every cent very carefully for the good of the students. Then you can see budget against tax levy, the changes. You can see that our budgets usually are lower than our tax levies. You can see in 17-18 a huge burp, and that's because we had to move the $2.2 million of the repair reserve through the budget. But if you take out that $2.2 million, that year also would have been our budget a lot lower than our tax levy.
You talk about 2015-16?
The big one.
Sir. Okay, so
17-18. You see the 17-18
right,
there.
there's $2 million. So what happened in 2015-16 that the budget was so much higher than the actual?
You're talking the one at the top or the one at the bottom?
So the budget in blue, so the one at the top, the budget was around a little over 74 million. And
In
then
that,
the
yes,
actuals were
in that year, actually we were coming off of many years with a lot of either tax accessories or lawsuits, and they stopped. I mean, and that's why if you look at that money, that's why we had such a big reserve, a big extra money to move to the repair reserve. So it's not like we spend the money, we said, okay, we did so well last year that let's move money and put it in a reserve.
And there was a huge effort for cost savings as well, to just be, to,
But the tax accessories were a lot. Remember, we had for several years to even issue bonds to be able to pay for tax accessories. And that year they completely stopped. They are picking up a little bit this year, unfortunately, but not much, not like those years. In the next one I'm showing revenues, and our total revenues, as you can see, obviously tax levies, the biggest part of our revenues, then the pilots, then you have state aid, fund balance, and other income. In the one at the bottom, again, you see that tremendous shift in the fund balance because of the $2.2 million. So obviously that brought it up and then down. But if not, as you can see, the rest are moved very within 5 to 10%. Fund balance, and this is the interesting part. The unassigned fund balance, as you can see, by law, we cannot have more than 4%. The blue one is the amount of fund balance. Again, in 2018, we had too much, and then we moved it to the reserve. And again, last year, we started saving money for when Indian Point closes. So we are above what we're allowed by law, but actually the state controllers were here and they understood that why we were above, so they didn't have any problem. And then I'll introduce the tax stabilization reserve in a couple of slides and explain why it's important. Then at the bottom you see our total fund balance. Our total fund balance is getting to $10 million, which is very good. In the last 8 years, it went from 4 to 10, so we're doing very well. That includes the repair reserve, the unemployment reserve, the ERS, and the unassigned fund balance reserve. Now let's move to the tax cap. As you know, the tax cap started in 2012. As you can see, we've always been below the tax cap, below inflation in every year but 1 year. And again, that was because of the transfer to the repair reserve. But the interesting part and the important part is how much our taxes, our tax cap has increased compared to inflation in the New York State. And as you can see, it's only half of the inflation. So our taxes have gone up half the inflation rate. And here are also good news. As you can see, our assessed valuation was going down, and this is because of all the tax surcease. All of you, like me, like everyone, the value of our houses went down after the financial crisis, so we all went and said, charge me less taxes. So our assessed value went down substantially. Still is $500,000 less than in 2012, but it has been going up over time, so that's a good news. On the bottom left, you can see by town. The blue one is town of Portland, the red one is city of Peekskill, and you can see the problem is that assessed valuations in the city of Peekskill went down substantially over a couple of years, and now again they are going up little by little in both the town and the city. And finally, it's just to show you town of Portland represent, and it's been very steady, about 87% of our total assessed value, and city of Peekskill 13%. Tax rates. This looks like huge movements, but really are movements of -2%, -1%, and as you can see at the bottom, the town of Portland from 2012 to 2020, the total tax rate increase has been about 9%, while for Peekskill has been 4.5%. So very good compared to other districts and inflation. I like this picture very much. Now I'm going to introduce the tax stabilization reserve. It's important because that's going to help us on dealing with Indian Point closure. So to start with it was approved on the 2018 budget proposal from the governor. It was a bill sponsored by Senator Murphy and Assemblywoman Sandy Califf. It was a bill due to just because of the consequence of the expected Indian Point closure. It's only for us, the town of Portland or the other jurisdictions that are affected also do not have it. The important part is that it has to be approved by voter referendum. So we're going to put it in as part of the, during the budget vote. It's going to be a separate proposition the day that we vote for the budget and for the board members. Also, is the board that set the maximum that can go into that reserve. And even if they say a number, it does not have to be funded by that number. It's just the maximum amount. And the purpose, like I said, is to set aside money to mitigate reduction of the pilots. So what we don't want is 1 year to have a tax rate of increase of 12% and the next year 3%. So by having this tax stabilization reserve, we can add money to the budget without having these huge changes in our tax rates.
Can the reserve be replenished? So in other words, we set an amount for the tax reserve, for the stabilization reserve, and then we deplete it over time. Can we then refill it?
That's a great question, and actually it's a question that they have not been able to answer to us. Joe is working on it. Joe?
Yeah, we're discussing with, the governor's team that exact question later in January, whether or not, as Enrique said, we set a cap, can't exceed. But eventually we're gonna withdraw. So let's say it's $10 million and let's say we funded it $10 million. And over time we take withdrawals from it. Does that $10 million cap stay in existence where we could still contribute back to that? We have so many questions around this, around the cessation fund, how the cessation fund and the reserve works. Can we take cessation money and put it in the reserve? This really is, this situation with Indian Point and how all of these things are coming together is a first for the state education department and for the governor's team or just the state of New York. So they may end up writing special legislation about how this behaves with all of the potential different revenue sources that we could have. The cessation fund one, any sort of federal assistance another, because right now the district receives federal money, but it's Title I, Title IIA, or Title II, 3, 4. Those monies are allocated from Washington based on different criteria that they set. You know, we could receive funding directly from Washington based on taxing spent fuel rods. Well, how do we receive that money? Where does it go? What account? So it's a good problem to have, but no one really knows the answers yet. What we do know is, in order to make this reserve legitimate, is we have to put a cap on it, and the voters have to approve the establishment. And what we will need to do from now until that happens is to educate people that says there's going to be a referendum to approve a tax stabilization reserve not to exceed X. You're not authorizing X. You're saying that we could put up to X in it, and that's going to be a real important communication that we have to have with the community.
Do we have to make a proposal
Yes.
as the board? Yes.
Yeah, so
It's like a budget proposal.
Yeah.
The board will have to decide the amount. The
That's
actual proposal, it's already there, we just need to set the amount.
Right.
And will it be a time-bound account? In other words, the account can only be open for 5 years or 10 years and then has to...
No, it doesn't say.
So it would be perpetual.
Yep.
And if we could replenish it, then it could actually ease
yeah.
the tax issues once Indian Point closes.
So we only have to vote on it once, or do we have to vote
The
on it?
board would pass a resolution to put it on the ballot
right?
just like you do the budget.
No, I know that,
And then we
yeah.
would put it on the ballot, we'd have the general budget, vote for your board members, and you, you know, in
Well,
favor
so-
of establishing the reserve.
So
it would
only
be-
once, that's all.
Only
once.
Okay.
The other question to be answered is if we say, just for argument's sake, say we have a $10 million cap and we happen to have a windfall, maybe federal money comes in that we're not expecting, can we do a second vote and say, okay, we'd like to increase that amount? to
That's
another
another question that we'll
Well, why
have,
can't
yeah.
you just take a large amount from the outset? I mean, say, take like 20, you don't, it's just, it's a cap, it's, you don't have
So we
to
don't want to
exceed it.
scare people by saying.
I appreciate that, but I
we don't
mean,
wanna-
but
We don't want to
again,
say,
that's-
you know, we'll put 30 million away when we're really.
No,
thinking
we're going
we
to
can-
try to.
Try
And
to,
this is
right.
the maximum we ever could, but we don't know if we're going, I don't think people, I mean, people have to listen, but I think, is there a reason to not, is your concern scaring them? I mean, and right now,
I'm sorry.
is it using a larger, I mean, why not just say a large, say, you know, our goal is $25 million.
We discussed that, it's really more than anything, it's a marketing issue, you know. It's, the other side is what Carol said. Just imagine, you come to all the board meetings, but the person that just shows there and says $20 million, they are going to tax me 20, no, because they won't get educated.
They don't understand it.
But that's why I'm saying, today, we don't have enough information to make the decision. If in 2 weeks, the information is, well, if you, you know, if you exceed that number, you can come back and we'll do it again, then that's it. We can say, okay, how much, I can tell you, I think that it's going to be, I can put aside $8 million to say a no.
Well,
Okay, let's put $8
Well, we're
million.
getting funding from the state potentially, we might get funding. So there needs to be a big enough account that if we get that money, we have a place to put it so that it can offset all the pilot losses, right? Because if the pilot loss is a
No,
third.
the pilot loss over 10 years is $69 million.
Well,
Right, well, but per year, let's say per year was
Yeah.
a
Just
pilot
to
loss.
soften the blow.
If you can replenish it,
That's what I'm
right,
saying.
then if you have a reserve that is equivalent to what the loss would be, then something
but-
like that could
But
make
we're
sense.
holding people's money, you know, we're holding what they could have at home to offset future
Well, it would be
losses. So
every
we don't
year.
wanna, you know, you wouldn't wanna put $65 million in an account today, and then we're not gonna be paying that off for 10 years, because some people in the community might say, well, I'm only gonna have my house for 8 years, so I don't really want that money held. So they might feel more comfortable having a smaller amount, saying, I'm okay with doing 10 or 12 million right now, and then if we need it, then I'll weigh in on whether we need
Yeah.
another 5 or 10 coming up.
And depending on the size
But
of
it's
that,
gotta
right?
be enough.
Your taxes are good, it's
Exactly.
either,
Right.
we have a bigger reserve and people don't have sharp increases in taxes, or we have a smaller reserve and the increases in taxes will be more
Sure.
substantial, right? So it's gonna be
Right.
a balancing act between the two, but if
Right.
you don't have enough leeway on the reserve side, you don't have that option.
Well,
to play with the
and
balance.
it's not to say that if we say we're gonna cap this at 10, 15, $20 million, that's, and we have more to put in, but it would exceed the cap, that's not to say it can't go to our general fund balance or other reserves and then seek legislative approval to either increase the cap or establish a whole nother reserve. You know, what the state typically does is when they give you special dispensation for a reserve for a community emergency like this, and it either ages out or you use all the funds, they'll reauthorize it because you need it and you have the revenue. I mean, the worst thing that could happen is if we receive an influx of state money, federal money, you name it money, and it's gotta go somewhere and can't go here, we just drive it to fund balance, and the auditors or the controller will say, gee, you have more than a 4% fund balance, and we say, yeah, we know, because A, we need it, and, you know, the constraints around this tax stabilization reserve are such that we can't put it in there, so we leave it in our, you know, checking account instead of the savings account.
Has this happened, I mean, where's this happened before? Or is this,
No
are
one
we
can
talking
identify-
uncharted here?
No one can identify a district that's dealt with this sort of potential revenue loss from tax entity.
And I
Because the
think-
la-
What
the
has
la-
happened,
in our,
it's happened, it's just a question of not.
I don't think it's happened in
Sure it
this,
has.
in
Other
this state.
yes, other places have closed down.
The folks we've talked to have not worked with a district who has been approved for a tax stabilization reserve, power plant cessation fund, or existing revenue will still get from the
There's
plan.
been, but I mean, sadly, all of upstate is littered with, you know, towns and municipalities that were once far more thriving.
Mhm.
And now it's, you know, they've had a loss of GE, or they've had a loss of, you know, companies that have left, you know, whatever. It's never been, this sort of action has not been taken.
Not through a reserve.
Okay.
And I think whatever we do, we have an obligation to educate the public. So I think we have to start planning that we'll go out,
Ourselves.
you know, and talk
So
to
totally different.
PTAs and our senior citizen groups and.
And remember, this was on our,
Anybody else?
this was on our radar a year ago.
Right.
But this, plus the budget, potential capital project, plus transportation bond, we said there's too much, we don't wanna confuse people, we wanna focus their attention on pass the budget, invest in our facilities, and then we
Right.
would re-up this. So, certain groups will hear this for a second time, and certain groups will hear it for the first. For example, when we went and did the tour with the seniors, we talked about this. We talked about the potentiality of you approving this reserve, which just gives us the opportunity to put money in it.
But is it really that complex? It's a savings account.
It's not complicated, I think it's optics. I think when people, you know, vote and they see a whole lot, or they see things that they're not used to seeing,
Or they say, oh my God, they have that $25 million, why are they raising our taxes?
That's right.
Why are they?
and one very, very important message around this, and this came out in a PTA conversation last year, is there may not be agreement in how we fund this. You know, I had conversations with PTA folks to say, okay, we know we need the money in 2023, so overtax us now, put it in the bank, and we'll use it in 2023. That sounds like not a half bad idea. Yet, not everyone who is going to be taxed higher now will be here in 2023. And that is a very legitimate concern to say, I see what you're doing. You're overtaxing and underspending so you can take care of a community that I might not be a part of later on. And that is a legit issue.
At the same time, while there's that side of that statement, it's also, okay, it's like if you, as a homeowner, have a bonus going with the house of an extra 100,000, you buy this house, you get 100,000.
Oh, there's a-
Your
yeah.
school district has an extra savings
Yeah.
built into it, so you're buying a house in this neighborhood, you're also buying into that asset of the reserve fund.
And it
So
mitigates
it's
their concerns.
Right, so it's adding value, even though
It-
they're not gonna be here for it.
It
It's
may not
adding
be a
value when they sell
one-to-one
it.
relationship. You're right. Look, we've been talking about Indian Point to say, with prospective families, that whatever your position is on nuclear power, that will be mitigated at some point.
No, but
And-
it's the financial thing, oh my God, what's gonna happen to
Well-
my taxes? You can sit here and say, that's fine, but there is this tax
That's right.
stabilization. So it's like, yes, you're putting it in, it's almost like, to a certain extent, an investment, if you're not going to be here.
You're right.
So,
and again, remember, this is our next year, the budget we're talking about, is the last year with the full Indian Point. So that tax stabilization, the money that is coming out of today's homeowners will be only whatever we can put aside this year and next year. And the rest is in case we get federal money and state money. So it's really, that's what I'm saying. If I have the time to explain it,
you're not
everyone,
getting
I can put $100 million and no one will say no. But the problem is, I don't have time to explain it, or no one has the time to hear me explain it when they go to vote. And that's a consideration.
and since we're trailblazing this kind of points out how proactive our administrators have been in really trying to get ahead of this situation in the board. We've been talking about this for a long time, so thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate everybody on that.
Thank you. So
Thank you for bringing that up.
now let's go to the good news, our budget for next year.
Admire the artwork.
Yeah, no, I'm trying, I'm admiring the artwork. So revenues, we're expecting revenues from state aid and BOCES to increase about 6.2%. And the reason is because BOCES made a mistake last year and underpaid all the districts, so they are going to pay it this year. So that will bring it to 6.2. Other income will increase about 3%. And that's due to our additional student for our ABC program. So when Lisa tells you that their budget is going up, it doesn't matter because there's revenue coming on the other side. So thank you, Lisa. Sales tax and transfers will increase slightly, about 1%. Our pilots will increase $550,000. So look at that because it's the last time that we say increase. And that's because energy will increase at $482,000 and the West Coast pilots will increase about $71,000, and that's because of our agreement with the city of Peekskill and the Peekskill School District back in 2011. Fund balance will decrease $856,000. If you remember last year, we used the last money that we had from fund balance from debt service from the 2012 bond, or the bond that we didn't spend the whole money and we returned it to the community. That's the way we return it to the community. And then the assigned fund balance, last year we used $2 million. This year we expect to use only 1.4. Our revenue projections, again, you can see it here on a more clearly way. You can see tax levy, it represents about 38%, then pilots, then state aid, and then other income, fund balance. Expenditures. All the assumptions, the first assumption is that we're planning to maintain all academic and support programs. We're not cutting anything, we're planning to maintain everything, and actually maybe Lisa needs to add a couple of positions, so not only maintain, but also increase some support programs. Also, if necessary, staffing reductions from attritions. And what this means is if we have music teacher that is retiring and we can accommodate the other music teachers to make up the hours, then we don't have to hire another one. Then here is where I'm saying Lisa needs an increase of $568,000 in her budget, additional positions, because we are going to have additional programs in the secondary levels.
Is this the 11th and 12th graders needing to expand their
The 18
classes?
to 21-year-olds, yeah.
The ABC class, the extra ABC class.
Standard 2.0 is what we're referring to it right now. We haven't named it yet.
And then the good news is that the teachers' retirement system, the employer contribution rate is expected to go down from 10.62 this year to 9.5, and that saves us about $242,000. Then, as we mentioned all last year for our capital project, we're starting to see some of our bonds mature. The interest expense is going down by $824,000. The ERS, it's decreasing 0.5%, but because of the general increase of salaries, the net is an increase of 0.9%. And then, big increase in health insurance, $618,000. The average health insurance premium will increase 3%. And as a form of information, the district insures 680 employees and retirees, and families and spouses. 333 retirees get Medicaid Part B, and 164 employees get a BAC. So the largest increases and decreases, obviously, as always, total salaries is our largest increase. This year, we expect about $714,000. Teachers' retirement, we're looking at a decrease of 242. Health insurance, like I just said, an increase of 618. Special education, an increase of 568. Social security, an increase of 51,000, and equipment, an increase of 51,000, and that's because if you remember last year, we decided not to do any equipment district-wide. So we're planning to buy, Laura is in charge of checking desks for the students, tables, everything. Some of them are 20, 30 years old, so we want to get into the habit of putting some money every year into that part of our facilities. And then the reduction of debt and interest of $824,000. As always, remember, I need to present this as the administrative program and capital budget by law. So here we are. The administrative, there's an increase of 1.7%. The program an increase of 2.2%, and the capital an increase of 6%, with a total increase of the budget of 1.2%. So, a summary. Our preliminary budget is between 80 million and 80.4. Last year, our budget was 79.5 million, so we're expecting a decrease between 542 and 941,000, which is a percentage increase between 0.68 to 1.18. On the tax levy side, our expected tax levy is 43.4. Last year was 42.6, which is an increase of 1.84. CAP information, if you remember, CAP is the lower of 2% or inflation. So inflation was 2%, so it stays at 2%. We're expecting our CAP to be 1.8. So our expected tax levy to be 43.4. Last year it was 42.6, so an increase of 784,000 or 1.84%. Long-term projections, basically what we're looking here is the increases that we talk. I want to talk a little bit about the projections. If you look at net 2020-2021, our proposed budget is less than this year, and that's because we expect some changes in the way we do some business. As you know, Joe hired a consultant group, and we expect to try to have some expense reductions of about $1 million, $1.5 million for that year, and then the following year also try to stay very, very low within the budget, below the cap, I'm sorry. So, thank you Thank you for your attention. I hope you like the pictures because the presentation wasn't that good.
It's a good trick. So like I said, this kicks off, our annual slog through the budget. We'll have the departments and leaders of those departments come as we receive more information about the assumptions on the expense and revenue side. Enrique updates every time that one pager of where we expect to end up. We're also always looking at our current year's budget to look at our expenses and revenues to see what we can drive to fund balance. So it moves and it's a fluid process, but we have been among the lowest suburban Westchester district in terms of tax increases, and you have some evidence of the outcomes for that investment. So I feel we've done a good job to our taxpayers and community, and over the next couple months we'll hear more about each department. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Does
you.
anybody have anything that they'd like to ask or comments? Okay. Thank you
Thank you.
very much, and we can enjoy.